A coming-of-age story, set during the Nazi siege of Leningrad. What could possibly go wrong? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your one-stop shop for all things audiobook. City of Thieves by David Benioff blends devastating historical events with the optimism of youth. It's set in 1943, when there was a Nazi siege on Leningrad. The book begins with present-day character David, who is tasked with writing an autobiographical essay. He chooses to write about his grandfather, Lev, and shortly after, the narration transitions to Lev telling his own story. Lev is a teenager living in Leningrad after his mother and younger sister have evacuated. He's in charge of a fire brigade serving as captain, and he feels it's his duty to stay even though his mother and sister implore him to go with him. Shortly after they leave, he's caught looting a dead German soldier's body. Now, even though it's a German soldier and not a Russian soldier, it's property of the state because once that soldier ended up in Russian property, he's stealing from the government, effectively. So he's thrown in jail, and that's where he meets Kolya, a slightly older Russian soldier who's been accused of deserting his platoon. After just one night in prison, an NKVD, or Russian Secret Police, colonel offers them a life-saving mission. If they can return in 4 days with a dozen eggs for a cake for his daughter's wedding, he'll spare them. Now, keep in mind, finding a dozen eggs doesn't really sound like a huge deal, but when there are food shortages and everything is being rationed, eggs are essentially like looking for a needle in a haystack. So 4 days to find a dozen eggs is a seriously challenging mission. As we follow the pair of unlikely friends on their journey to find eggs, we're given a look into the siege that we wouldn't ordinarily get. Now, if you're not one for historical fiction novels, please know that this is one that really makes it accessible. It's much more focused on the story between the relationships of the boys as they face life-challenging situations than it is on the war specifically. So it's really what they're experiencing more than a story of the war itself. The boys have extremely different sets of skills, but more importantly, they have different attitudes. The book highlights the importance of humor, optimism, and just positivity in general on keeping up morale during this pretty harrowing situation. One could argue that small tasks like finding a dozen eggs really distract the boys from their living situation, but the truth is that small tasks like that, like finding food and finding your next place to stay, are really critical to focus on during a larger disaster. Now, these boys have nowhere to stay and they have no source of food, but they do have optimism and something to strive for, and that's really critical to their life and survival. Also critical is their adaptability as young men. They're not really focusing on the negative here. They're focusing on what they have to do and what needs to happen to get it done. The book is told in retrospect by Lev, who survives from the beginning of the story where you're introduced to his grandson. Now, I must admit that my suspension of disbelief is pretty intense, and I completely forgot that we know he survives, and I spent a lot of the book really wondering how he was going to do and how Kolya was going to do, and just sort of on the edge of my seat as to their survival. My most frequent reminder that the story was going to end positively for Lev was Ron Perlman as the narrator. He doesn't fit as a teenage boy at all, but he does a great job of representing a grizzled old man who has seen the horrors of war firsthand. You get the sense that he's telling a story he's told over and over again throughout his life, though possibly in more detail this time. He really does an excellent job of representing that gruff and really charismatic voice that we're used to from his acting, and it translates perfectly to an audiobook. He's a fabulous narrator. Every time I thought this doesn't sound like a teenager, I had to remind myself, it's not. It's an older man who we're hearing about when he was a teenager. The book feels like a memoir right down to the sometimes vulgar conversation between the two boys. I wouldn't say it at any point crosses the line to offensive, but it really sounds convincing as to how two late teens would talk to each other, especially with no adults around. The way that they interact feels very natural and very authentic, and you sometimes have to remind yourself that they've only known each other a few days, but they're united by their mission to find these eggs because it means survival. Overall, I gave this book a 4.5. It wasn't really perfect in my opinion, but it's pretty fantastic. Now, it's only an 8-hour audiobook, which I would say is on the shorter side, but I found myself really savoring it. As a comparison, I finished an 11-hour audiobook right after this in just 2 days, and I didn't really enjoy that one. But I savored this book over 6 days. I'm not sure if it was the headspace that it put me in or just the vibe of the story, but I really wanted to take my time with this one. Maybe it was also a little bit of Ron Perlman too. If you're interested in historical fiction but don't know where to start, I think this book is a great choice. It's not too long, it doesn't overwhelm you with details about the war, and it really just gives you the lived experience of these two boys. If you're a veteran of historical fiction and haven't gotten to this one yet, you should probably pick it up soon. I feel a little bit like I stumbled on a small masterpiece here, and this is one that I think will stick with me for quite some time. The characters were really memorable, what they go through is really intense, and it feels very real. As an audiobook, it's excellent, and I will definitely look for other things that Ron Perlman has narrated because he was a perfect fit for this one, but I really appreciated his skill, and I heard his acting roots in the way he spoke the book. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion. But thanks for listening to mine. Hope you like and subscribe. See you next time.